Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory, the podcast that's been connecting the dots of TV, women, and feminism to American history and culture for more than 6 years. Find Advanced TV Herstory on most podcast apps, YouTube, Spotify, and Pandora, and head to tvherstory.com for ways to connect and follow this independent podcast. This episode is a two-part interview with author, poet, and professor Shayla Lawson, and we're going to talk about her book, This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope. I discovered this book when doing additional research on a topic near and dear to my heart. Diana Ross's 1983 concert in Central Park. I knew from reading Shayla's thoughts about Diana and the concert that I had to invite her on. This concert is as relevant today as it was in 2015 when I produced the first podcast episode on it. It really is a major moment in TV herstory, and we're going to tell you why. So stay tuned for a chat about leadership, authenticity, being prepared, as well as things like the Jim Crow laws and how they affected Diana Ross's entire career, hair and makeup for Black women, and the sheer longevity and soul of Diana Ross. Shayla brings her perspective and more, fresh from her 2020 book of essays, This Is Major. Listeners, enjoy. Welcome, listeners, to Advanced TV Herstory. It's been a while, hasn't it? And it's been a while also since I've done an interview. So here we are in 2021. We're trying as hard as we can to get out of the pandemic and return to normal. We have interviews and we have books being published, and not my book being published, but rather others are publishing books. And what better way to connect with those authors who have an attachment to TV and women and powerful women and ideas than to reach out to Shayla Lawson, who is our guest today. So welcome, Shayla.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. It's nice to be
And you are coming to us from the West Coast, right? Even though you are,
yes,
for the most part, East Coast oriented.
Yeah. So right now I'm in Los Angeles.
All right. But you're not in like Diana Ross's guest room or anything? No,
nothing like that.
Well,
although I'd love to spend
I'll just say this in the first couple minutes. If Diana or anybody from the family or the staff is listening, there are two fans currently about to embark on a heck of a conversation because my passion does not end. And I encountered that in reading your book. So listeners, Shayla Lawson is going to tell us a little bit about herself, about the book that she published last year, which had to have been the most challenging thing anybody has to do. Here, get a book deal. Oh, hey, write your book. Hey, get it published, and then have a pandemic happen. And it's called This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope. So Shayla, tell us a little bit about yourself and then sort of what was in your mind when you realized you, a poet and a writer, could put these thoughts onto paper and the world wanted to read it, which I think they do.
I guess I just don't see it as that different than writing poetry, and that I'm always just looking for the best way to tell a story. And so I had some stories that I wanted to tell that involved more space on the page than what a poem could allow for. I wanted to do essays that started to reflect things that I'd learned about Black women and their effect on culture. And the best way to do that was to try and experiment with a larger form. So that was a lot of my motivation for going that route. I just like writing a lot. I think just the act of writing itself is really enjoyable for me. So playing around with a different way to do it was really exciting after working through, I guess, 3 poetry collections. So
it's a series of essays, 7, 8, something like that.
There's 16 essays.
16. Oh, they go fast.
Yeah.
From the time that you started the first one to the time that you ended the last one, about what was that span?
I wrote all of those essays in about 9 months.
Wow. Prolific. I think that's the word, prolific.
It was a challenge, but it was also good. I mean, I had a lot of support. My title at Amherst College at the time was writer in residence. So they were very pro me writing. And then I had a fellowship from the New York Public Library to do a lot of my research. So the combination of both made staying in that writing bubble a lot easier than it probably could have been under other circumstances.
So there is about, well, more than a dozen years, more like I think you were born the year that I graduated from high school, but that's okay.
Mhm.
Because you do have a vast knowledge, and it's depicted in your essays, a vast knowledge of American history, of cultural history, and of a lot of the contextual work that I end up doing in this podcast to try to help people understand how history has influenced what we see on TV, what we see in film, read, etc. Um, Loved the segments about the American Girl dolls and the American Girl stories,
Thank you. It's one
and
of my
in
favorites.
and so my daughter was, the American Girls had been out there for a little while. We had all the books, or at least all the original books, and I didn't want to get her a doll because and we could afford it. It was a little bit of a stretch at the time, but I said, you know what? First of all, you shouldn't have to take care of another being lifelike or plastic any
Right.
sooner than you have to.
It's very true.
I don't want to encourage your nurturing skills quite yet. And, I just had the sense that it was going to be about a 2-week window and then it would be done. So I think she would
Yeah.
concur.
It's been nice to see how many people have a connection to the American Girls as some point of reference in their families, whether it was the decision to get a doll or the decision not to get a doll, and what that represented and what it represented to choose a specific doll. That was really fun for me to consider, and then also find so many people that connect with that as a specific experience. Because that was something that I really wanted to do in the book, was write experiences that a lot of different people could connect to, and just give them the lens into what it was like to be a Black girl and be going through those different things.
And I find the book amazing. It does feel like you're just basically talking to us, that it's just letters to the readers from you of what's going on in your head. And women of my generation, white women, any woman of my generation, just was never encouraged. We weren't really ever thought that what we had to say was that important.
It's totally true. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons why both you and I are such fans of Diana Ross, because she seemed to always make it known what mattered to her.
Yeah.
And like, she was a real pioneer of that, of being her full self, of being vulnerable, being a really hard worker. And those are all the things that I admire about her, which is why she was one of the lens into thinking about these stories that we connect on.
She is, yes, she is seminal to my whole world. And I will say that when Donna Summer passed away, with short notice,
Donna Summer as well, yeah.
That 1999 VH1 concert. I mean, that literally, I have exercised that. My kids know every note of that CD by heart. I even watched it I listened to it a couple days ago because it's a great sort of exercise soundtrack of sorts. And she just had an entire story to tell. Oh my gosh. Okay. But that's a VH1 concert. So technically I could do a Donna Summer concert some episode.
Yes.
And her husband's floating around and her daughters are around. I mean, people are accessible. And that's the one thing about the pandemic, is all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, somebody wants to talk about this arcane sort of thing. But I'm going to ask you a question before we go any further, and it's not in the preparation materials, but I do ask it a lot of my guests. What were the 2 or 3 TV series from your childhood that you watched growing up that you started to realize, hey, that's me? Or that's what I'm thinking.
I'm excited about this. I would say A Different World. That was amazing to me, to see these different Black women that were planning their futures and their dreams. I think it really influenced the ways that I thought about college, and probably why I'm a college professor to this day. I love the fact that, it's directed by a Black woman. I could go on and on. Anyway, I'll keep going. So A Different World, Family Matters, just seeing a regular, everyday family, and also somebody incredibly nerdy added to that mix I really connected with.
And Family Matters was Alan Thicke and Tracy
No,
Cole.
Family Matters was the show that had Steve Urkel on it, and Carl Winslow was the father. He was a police officer. They were like a middle class family in Chicago. I think it was Chicago. Yeah.
Okay. So now when you say Steve Urkel, now I have the
Yeah.
picture of what that is. But there were too many
Yeah. We watched it,
televisions.
very TGIF, like every Friday night when I was growing up. And then I was also thinking about the cartoon Daria, really
Oh,
related to and I love the fact that Tracy Ellis Ross is doing a reboot of that.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, that focuses on the black girl character,
Mhm.
which I think is really exciting. I loved that Daria was kind of a misfit. I related to a lot of the different girls on that show as well in a lot of different capacities. So I'm really excited about that, and I was glad to see that it's something that like Tracy Ellis Ross also connected with.
Yes. Oh, three. Well, I can't speak to Family Matters,
Yeah.
but Different World. I did a great interview with Robin Means Coleman, who actually, as a professor, teaches A Different World, and I think that that's great. And she's now at Northwestern, and so I have to get back to her. It was a great conversation we had. A Different World has aged so well because what they did is they stuck to those universal stories of being on your own for the first time,
Yeah.
compromising and starting to trust people or not trust people.
And I
And
love the generational stories of women, that the juxtaposition of what women were supposed to do, that the connections that they have with their mothers or with any mentors, versus looking at now that they are becoming adults, like how do they decide what they want to do, who they're going to be as women. I think that, yeah, it's such a universal thing for us to still be thinking about.
the challenging questions, honestly, I'm thinking of the what was it, the Mammy episode? It was fairly late. It was when Jada Pinkett was part of sort of she was an occasional cast member,
Hmm.
and Whitley kind of came back and she put on this big production. That stuff is all really profound. That still,
Yeah.
I'm guessing there are white people at least who watch that who go, I never thought about that.
Hmm.
So thank you, Debbie Allen and the gang, for all of those great seasons that really evolved,
Absolutely.
and that all of those everybody associated with the show really has only continued to contribute, sometimes actually more behind the scenes. And Daria, I think we can see today that Daria had a wonderful effect. I mean, she really mirrored exactly what Gen X has become and the force
Hmm.
of Gen X and the older millennials. Wow. Okay. So I just had to ask you that because that's fun.
Okay.
And you, so you are currently a teacher of poetry and writing. Is that what you're doing?
That's
Or
correct. Yeah, I teach creative writing for the English department at Amherst College.
cool,
Mhm.
cool. And about how many students then do you teach in the course of a year, or how large are your classes? Is it an intimate
And
experience?
currently I have 40. So I'm teaching a course that is called Poetry with Friends, which gets a lot of students involved because it's a bring a buddy class. They do collaborative projects because I've gotten a lot out of doing collaborative work. And I actually teach it with one of my artistic collaborators. So that's pretty amazing. And then the other course that I'm teaching is a course about developing non traditional writing projects. So, a hybrid forms course in which people can build whatever they want. Some people are doing a musical, some people are writing a part of a novella. Everybody's doing
Mhm.
different types of projects. And we just align by having lessons on all the different types of modes that you can use in creative expression that still qualify as writing in one way or the other.
Mm, yes. And that's a challenge to do in this whole sort of TLDR mindset where people don't want to read. They want to be, it needs to be boiled down and synthesized,
Yeah,
but also we're trying to get across. I mean, the value of storytelling is to slow down enough to bring in all of the rich detail and create something that will stick with them for a period of time.
I believe that. I really do. Yeah.
So that brings us to the telling the greatest story of all time. There really is only one.
Only one.
And I watched it twice last weekend. And so, listeners, here we are. This is a revisitation of the 1983 Diana Ross Central Park concert episode that I recorded for this podcast way back in when I was still living in Minnesota. In 2015, I want to say, maybe early 2016. And it was back when Shout Factory had just, within like a year, released this on DVD. And I had the presence of mind to buy it. And I'm a big believer in physical media, and I'm glad I did, because it's now very difficult to find. And I hope that she's going to do something special with it. So in Shayla's book, she kind of gets into the weeds, into her love of this entire concert. How did you first stumble upon Diana and the concert?
As a kid, I remember watching it on VHS with my parents. So I I don't remember seeing the special live on television, but I remember we used to watch all the Stevie Wonder specials that used to be on television in the 80s and 90s. The Pointer Sisters usually did specials. So all of the music specials were often a way for my family to get together with our other neighbors and family members and just spend time together watching these events. And so I remember the VHS being one of those things that would pop up as an event, an occasion when we would put that in, and it would be like we were at the concert ourselves. And I don't know, it's a different mode of watching TV than I think what we're used to now, particularly with streaming, where putting that together as an event that multiple people would get together, in front of the TV on the sofa and watch, was something that when direct TV was less common, that felt really special. Like this opportunity for us to decide we were all going to get together and watch this thing in a very particular moment. So it's always felt really celebratory to me, and also just very, I learned a lot from watching the way that she executed getting through a rainstorm in that I've always been just awed by the way that Diana Ross handles that entire situation.
It's amazing. So, if listeners have not listened to that episode that I recorded back in the day, this is a 1983 concert that she conducted in Central Park as a follow-up, like her holding her own against the fact that Barbara Streisand had done it and had 80,000 people, and Simon and Garfunkel, maybe they had 100,000 people. And by the time this whole story is coming out, supposedly she had somewhere between 350 and 600,000 people. It just depends on who's doing the count. Not that anything was so sophisticated back in the day that they had the clickers, the people clicking into their little thing. This is gritty, sort of pre-gentrified New York City. So the DVD has this little, it's got a little warm-up intro thing of kind of what New York was looking like that summer of 1983. And if you've ever been to New York in the summertime, it can get really humid. And yeah, the rain, the clouds just open up, and always at 3 or 4 o'clock. And that's exactly what happened. Is this incredible storm rolled in. And you think to yourself in 2021, it's 1983. Didn't they have weather reports? Well, to read as little as has been written about this, yes, they sort of knew that this weather was expected. She put up a ton of money to make this happen, to make this a spectacle. It was part of Showtime's rollout to be this value. Showtime was original paid premium TV. And we didn't get it in our house because we didn't pay for, we had cable, and that was it. We're paying enough. So Diana goes up, and this is after she's been in everybody's mind since 1964, when the Supremes really kind of hit. It was back in the day when a Jumbotron was at best something that was inside an arena. I can't vouch for anything more. I mean, I think there probably were, but here were two out in Central Park. So when was the last time you watched this concert, Shayla?
I think it's probably been about 6 months since I watched it. I listened to the director's commentary, which I had never heard before, but I just listened to it. I didn't watch it in conjunction with the film, but having watched it so many times and writing the book, it's so vivid in my mind. The orange chiffon, the way the rain is pouring down on her. I love the point where she yells out at the audience, that it's all right if we all get wet.
Yeah.
The humor that she tries to approach it with. I also thought it was really interesting in terms of the weather, to think about the fact, one of the things that I got out of listening to the audio commentary for the first time is I didn't realize just how bad of a storm it was. So the director mentions that he'd worked on a Lucille Ball special where in London, where it was also like pouring rain. But typically, even if it's raining, you can't see it, which says how crazy this rainstorm was that Diana Ross was performing through, because it is a torrential downpour. You can see the way that the water is blowing back her makeup and the way that it's blowing back her hair.
That
She still
makeup,
looks phenomenal.
that makeup was like,
Just impeccable.
It was, oh God. I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot not watch. You're not even
cannot
listening
not
to
watch.
what's going on.
Yeah.
You're looking at
Yeah.
this makeup, and the fact that however many few camera operators were still going, they were able to get right into her, and she knew exactly how to play all those angles.
Yeah. And then I loved in my research reading how Tracy Ellis Ross talks about how Diana Ross has always done her own makeup. So more than likely for that production, there was another stage event in which Diana Ross had done her own makeup and hair.
Mm-hmm.
And the impeccableness with which it held together, even in the midst of something so large and something so, she's basically performing in a tornado and
Mm-hmm.
looks phenomenal.
Right. So
everything holds together.
I'm not a big makeup person, but is there like rain makeup? Is it just better mascara and eyeliner?
I mean, apparently for Diana Ross, I think I think a lot of it just has to do with application and being really, really skilled at how to pull that all together. I'm not a makeup person either. Occasionally I'll watch, some amazing makeup tutorial on TikTok, but
there's an Elizabeth Taylor makeup like on YouTube of Elizabeth Taylor putting on her makeup post Cleopatra. Anyway.
Incredible. Yeah. And it's just another one of her skills. I think it's, just another thing that we can chalk up to like a testimony of her skill set and just how good of how consummate a performer she is. She's thinking about every part of the performance, including the way she looks on stage.
And those skills, to her credit and to recognition of the journey that took her to Central Park, is that in 1964, she was doing her own makeup. She was probably doing her own hair, in part because there was no money to pay anybody else for that. And wherever she happened to show up, there was not going to be necessarily a woman or a man who as a makeup and hair artist could really help them achieve the look that they needed to achieve consistently. That's a point.
Yeah, and that was part of the Motown engine. The idea was that all of these artists were built to be so self-sufficient that when they went on the road, they wouldn't need a lot of auxiliary help, because particularly with the prejudices of certain areas that they were going into, it would be dangerous for them to rely on the idea that they could get somewhere and get all the tools that they need. Right. So Diana Ross really took that to heart and extended it in terms of the ways that she operates in her career, where it's like whatever initial tutorials she got about how to care for herself as an artist on the road, she continued and refined and perfected so that she is her own vehicle. I was talking to my manager, and my manager used to work at CAA at a time where Diana Ross was represented by them. And she even told me, as recent as I'd say in the last 10 years, Diana Ross pulled up to the doors of CAA in an immaculate Porsche and stood, and they'd bring out a stack of papers and she would stand and read every single one before signing them. She is that dedicated to every aspect of her career that you would think that she's outsourcing all of these things, but she is the idea that she is a one-woman shop, that she's a real business mogul in the way that she's doing every single one of these things, I'm just so drawn to.
But when you realize how many women she has lived through whose careers were devastated by managers 100%. And attorneys and accountants who just sold them all blind, whether 100%. It's Irene Cara Irene Cara should try to bring herself back. Yeah. Diana lasted through Donna and Whitney. I mean, they were the two who were just younger than she. Donna Summer by just a little bit.
Yeah, and it's the span of her entire career, she has outlasted nearly everyone that has come behind her. Right. She's the predecessor to so much of what we see now, and her career is still ongoing in a way that we've watched so many stars come, shine really brightly, and then fade. Diana Ross is kind of a constant radiant energy that we've gotten to experience over the last What? I mean, she's
She's
in her 80s now.
75. She's
75.
been,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
she's been,
So at least
you
50
know,
years.
50, 64 gets you to 57 years ago.
Yeah. Whoa. It is
Right.
phenomenal.
Right. And really, when, the research that you did, the research that I do, there's not that much. She
No.
wrote kind of a skimpy little memoir that didn't tell much, because women
Yeah.
of her generation don't tell much.
Yeah. It would have been dangerous for her to say too much about who she is.
Right.
And yeah.
The talk about the hair a little bit. So Black women hair details is only something that I started learning more so about from like reading Diane Carroll's memoir, which is pretty fascinating, and the challenges that she had when they would bring her to the set, and then the hair person has never done a Black woman's hair. So talk a little bit about what you understand the Supremes situation was, and then 83 and Diana just getting up there all natural. And now what we would see today, if Diana thinks that, Beyonce is she is this next thing, and she's only like, Diana only follows 17 people on Twitter or something like that. And Tracy and Beyonce are like are two of, and Oprah,
Yeah.
So talk about the hair, because you talk about her hair situation in the book.
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about in the book is the relationship, particularly in the 80s and 90s, that Black women had to the idea of our hair, and particularly like our hair as an extension of our beauty. And it's always been really difficult to, especially in it's gotten a much better. If we look at like the 21st century, our options are so much more profound. Like we have so many more options when it comes to Black women and hair, but when it comes to the 80s and 90s, it was really difficult to find people who could take care of Black women's hair in a good fashion. It's hard to find good hairdressers. It was hard to find good products. And with Diana Ross being a stage performer, the idea that you don't want just well-styled hair, like you want glamour, you want something larger than life, and that became such an extension of her personality. And they're just given the number of different styles that we've watched Diana Ross's hair change into over the years, there's definitely a sense that augmentation was part of that. But there's a great quote from a Diana Ross scholar who has this question of like, but who was weaving hair in the 80s, other than Diana Ross? Because if we look back at the time period, the styles that she was wearing were just far ahead of their time. So when we're looking at Diana Ross in Central Park, she has this gorgeous mane of hair, very similar. It reminds me a lot of, I feel like the look really influenced Beyonce's look for Coachella, where you got magnificent, just like larger than life screen hair. And so there's a good sense that like there's some augmentation going on because it's a part of the theater of it. But there is nary a moment when you're looking at the point where pretty much any woman would freak if they had a hairstyle that they had set for the day. Like imagine that it's your wedding. You've got your wedding hair set and it's pouring down and it's a torrential rainstorm. Like nobody's hair can usually hold up to that. And the fact that Diana Ross's look actually maintains so much of its glamour when she is completely soaking wet, and not wet in a way of like a controlled theatrical moment, wet in the way of like this is just nature coming at it with its full force. And still Diana Ross stays together in this way that I was really touched by as a girl, because as a little girl, one of those stories of growing up and being Black that's shifting, because we are there's more space for us to wear our natural hair. But when I was young, and if my hair was braided or if it was augmented in any way or if it had been straightened, the rule was I couldn't go outside and get it wet, because that would immediately mean that it would turn back to my natural curl pattern, which would be completely outside of the shape that we had set for the day. And with Diana Ross, I was just really moved to watch her do this thing that I was told, like as as a good Black girl, that you couldn't get away with. And it shifted the idea of vulnerability and like what you can look like and what you can be in this world in terms of your body. That there's this level of freedom with which she approaches that moment of like, okay, like I'm just going to be in this with everybody else. And it makes her even more beautiful to me, that there's just such realness and honesty in that approach to being like, whatever the consequences, I'm going to be here. And like, that's the beauty that I'm channeling. I'm not worried about on the external, like whether or not people are judging exactly what I look like in this moment. But that said, like, that I don't know if it's the internal beauty or the external beauty, or the that magnificent combination of both. She looks incredible in this way that I feel so iconic.
So I'm just kind of having some thoughts about some things you've said, and the notion that for 20 years before this concert, she had been doing her makeup. She knew how to control her hairstyles and to sort of move toward a hairstyle, whether it was inside or outside. She's also trying to evolve out of her Berry Gordy years, where she's owning, she had a tremendous great selling LP in 1980, but here it was 83, and Whitney's crawling up. And so there's lots of stuff, and she needs to position herself now kind of the way that Barbra Streisand had sort of shifted her positioning. They had both done a little bit of film, but here she is. It's humid as all get out in New York. And so she's going with what she's decided is a natural hairdo. And you don't think that there was anything additional extension wise? I mean, it sure looks like when it's soaking wet, it's just hair, right?
I mean, we can't say. I'm saying that like many people have pontificated about what is happening on stage when it comes to Diana Ross's hair in that show. I would say if we think about some of her other looks from the time, there's the possibility that particular look was augmented, because it is like a really illustrious, magnificent head of hair. And a lot of her other looks during that time are about shoulder length, or she was a little bit lower than shoulder length. So just thinking about that logistically, it feels like it's a stage look. But that's the thing, is that she had such facility with the way that her materials were put together, that if it is any kind of augmentation, then the quality of the products that she was pulling together, it's the same woman who, is standing outside of an immaculate Porsche with a stack of, 300 pages and reading through each one really detailed to make sure she misses nothing. Like Diana Ross just misses nothing when it comes to detail.
And that preparation, a little bit more backstory that we are able
to. TV Herstorians, thanks for spending a little time today with me and Shayla. Remember to grab a copy of Shayla Lawson's This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope, which was published in 2020 by Harper Perennial and was a nominee for the National Book Critics Circle Award in the category of autobiography, as well as a Goodreads Choice Award nominee. However, if you're looking for the concert on DVD, I wish you good luck. It was distributed by Shout Factory about 7 years ago, but has been discontinued. You can find copies of it on the internet. You can also find it actually streaming on Amazon Prime Video. Many thanks to Catherine Yang for audio and graphic production and editing, and to Jazzer, the talent behind our podcast's jingle, Take Me Higher, which I found at freemusicarchive.org many moons ago. We produce this podcast with no advertising. Find Advanced TV Herstory on most podcast apps, YouTube, Spotify, and Pandora, and head to tvherstory.com for ways to connect, follow this independent podcast, and even subscribe to our monthly e-newsletter. We promise not to share your information. Special thanks to you, Shayla Lawson, for sharing your thoughts on Diana's triumph of spirit and soul. I do love this story, and this is why I podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.